After a second, the phone emitted long rings. Another minute passed, but Mark didn't answer the call. Then the voicemail assistant suggested that Kira leave a voice message. She left a brief message: "Mark, honey, please call me back. I'm really worried." Then, after disconnecting from the phone, Kira carefully examined her husband's office, trying to find any clues. She decided to try to access the computer but found it protected by a password. She pondered a possible password when suddenly her mobile phone rang again. Kira grabbed the phone and quickly called her friend Vera. Vera's voice came from the other end of the line, and Kira answered, "Yes." There was a tone of anxiety and worry in her voice. Vera, upon hearing Kira's voice, asked what had happened and why she sounded so concerned. Kira, with a heavy heart, explained that Mark had disappeared, and Alla became agitated. Alla asked Kira to keep her informed if any news arose and expressed her concern for her friend. After ending the call with Alla, Kira returned Vera's phone and assured her that she would contact her as soon as any information became available. Then Kira disconnected from the call and went home, where she faced the tense reality. She hoped to find her husband at home and get an explanation from him. However, upon returning home, Kira discovered that nothing had changed since they left. Mark hadn't returned home, and his car was nowhere to be seen. Kira began to panic and worry, standing at the threshold of her home. Her eyes repeatedly tried to penetrate the endless horizon in search of her husband, but each time, she only saw emptiness. She tried to call Mark again, but each time, she heard only ringing and silence, which heightened her anxiety. Kira's heart raced faster, and she felt fear taking hold of her. Kira entered the house, checked the bedroom and the closet with Mark's clothes. All of her husband's belongings and shoes were in place, except for his large sports bag, which he usually took with him on trips. A dreadful thought passed through her mind, as if a black cloud had descended over her life. She took off her woolen cardigan and cautiously sat on the edge of the bed. Her breathing was heavy and emotions raged inside her. She noticed a small note folded in quarters, which had apparently fallen out of her pocket when she removed the cardigan. The note contained only 4 words: "Don't look for me. Forgive." The letters were written in Mark's handwriting, and each of them felt to Kira as laden and heavy as a stone. Kira pressed her hand against the painting, and tears streamed from her eyes as if a river of pain and disappointment. "You couldn't have done this to me, Mark. You couldn't have left me," she thought, as if the words had torn her heart to pieces. Each tear, remaining on the canvas, seemed to her a living embodiment of her bitterness. Kira felt as if at that moment the world had suddenly lost all its colors, becoming dull and lifeless, mirroring her emotional state. It was as if she had plunged into a gray and cold world of loneliness. Her heart ached at the thought that her husband had planned everything in advance, even slipping the note into her pocket over breakfast, all to escape unnoticed. She didn't know what to do or how to understand what was happening. She couldn't believe in such a devious plan by her own husband, the man she had lived with for almost 8 years. Why did he do this? Couldn't he have talked to her like a human being, instead of resorting to this deceitful scheme? Kira's despair and confusion grew as she realized that no one in their circle of friends and acquaintances had any information about Mark's whereabouts. It seemed that he had managed to disappear without a trace, leaving her alone in this distressing situation. As hours turned into days, Kira's anxiety continued to mount. She desperately waited for any sign, a message, or a call from Mark, hoping that he would at least reach out to let her know he was safe. She couldn't help but worry about his well-being as well, feeling that he, too, must be in a state of unease. The silence and uncertainty were taking a heavy toll on her emotions. Kira knew she had to take action. She decided to reach out to her husband's family, even though she had had a somewhat distant relationship with them. She needed to explore every possible lead and connection. With trembling hands, she dialed Mark's parents' number, hoping for some answers or reassurance. Mark's mother answered, her voice trembling as well. Kira quickly explained the situation and asked if they had heard from him or had any knowledge of his whereabouts. After a brief silence, Mark's mother said, "Kira, we haven't seen or heard from him either. This is so unlike him. We're worried too." Kira thanked Mark's mother for her time and support and hung up the phone. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. With no information, no leads, and no sign from Mark, she was left alone to grapple with her fear, anxiety, and a growing sense of abandonment. As more days passed, Kira's resilience was tested. She began consulting with a private investigator to help locate Mark and unravel the mystery behind his sudden disappearance. She couldn't live in the shadows of uncertainty any longer and needed answers, whatever they might be. The search for her husband had become an all-consuming quest, driven by her love, concern, and the need for closure. But nothing happened. The woman kept her laptop open all evening and through the night, with her phone set to access all the messengers, but Mark never showed up. Every minute felt endlessly long, and Kira couldn't understand what was happening. The next morning, Kira decided that she couldn't wait any longer and do nothing. She went to the police station and filed a missing person report. Whatever it was, she needed to know that he was safe in the hands of the police. At the front desk for filing reports, she felt like a carnivorous animal devoured by fear and anxiety. How could she have ever imagined having to go to the police about the disappearance of her own husband? Kira's concerns about her husband being kidnapped or something terrible happening to him were met with skepticism. "If you're saying there was a note and your husband's travel bag disappeared," reasoned the investigator who received Kira, "it all looks rather, forgive me for being blunt, straightforward. Your spouse could have easily run away with a lover or simply because he got fed up with everything. This even sounds like nonsense." These words tore at Kira's heart, but she understood that she now had to contend not only with the world's lack of understanding but also with the lack of understanding from those who should be helping. Despite the skepticism of those around her, Kira was ready to do everything to find Mark and unravel this mysterious story that had turned her life upside down. Kira was indignant, saying, "You understand that Mark wasn't the kind of person to just walk away from everything like that. He has a multimillion-dollar business, and he wouldn't abandon it for any woman, no matter how splendid she might be." Her voice was persistent and convincing, reflecting not only anger but also deep concern. Kira knew that the situation left her no choice. She had to compel the police to start searching for her husband, no matter the cost. The investigator looked at her condescendingly and then nodded. "All right, let's see that note. We'll have the experts take a look." He was willing to listen to Kira, even though her words remained highly questionable in the eyes of the police. Kira sincerely thanked the police officer for taking on her case. "But I must warn you," he raised a warning finger, "I won't give you false hope. Usually, when people disappear like this, they either don't want to be found, or are you saying that Mark might be dead?" Kira barely held back her words, as if speaking of the worst possible outcome. Her eyes were filled with fear and the hope that it was all just a nightmare from which she would wake up. "You understood me correctly," the investigator replied, confirming the dark thoughts that tormented Kira. Kira left the police station and, when she reached the nearest bench, she cried bitterly. Her tears flowed like a river of pain, enveloping her, and she felt like she had lost her last thread of hope. "I have to believe that my husband is alive," Kira thought to herself. "I have to hold on to save our business and our family's honor." With these thoughts, she got into her car, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Inside her, a storm of mixed emotions raged: despair, anger, fear, and helplessness. Her spouse had disappeared, and his business was now more vulnerable than ever. What would she tell the shareholders, partners, and company employees? How would she announce Mark's absence at all the meetings and business gatherings? The police created a missing person report for Mark and provided them with a high-quality photograph of her husband. Now, she had to discuss the next course of action with Dmitri, her right-hand man in the business. They needed to take responsibility for maintaining the business and solving the mystery of Mark's disappearance, no matter how challenging it might be. Dmitri had been a longtime friend and companion of Vlad, her late husband and former boss. He had always been a loyal aide, first to the deceased director and then to Mark himself. Dmitri, too, was not young anymore, but his physical condition was impressive due to his diligent health care. He looked considerably younger than his 60-something years, and his energy always inspired those around him. "You have to understand, Dmitri, I can only trust you," Kira confided honestly in him about what had happened. "You are the only one Mark could always turn to as the elder figure. What's happened to him, Dmitri?" Her voice sounded bitter and anxious, as if each word was a piercing question to which she awaited an answer with hope and concern. "Darling, well, you're worrying too much too soon," Dmitri said as he took her hand, clearly concerned. He understood that Kira needed support and understanding at this moment. Who knows, maybe he's just been burning out lately. So much has been piling up on him. His parents passed away not long ago. I'm not entirely convinced that he was able to fully recover from such a loss. Dmitri tried to comfort her, suggesting a scenario where Mark had simply taken some time off to reevaluate his life. Kira nodded. She remembered how heavily her husband had grieved the loss of both his parents, but could he really do this, considering even in such mournful circumstances. Everything in this situation seemed mysterious and convoluted. I ask you to temporarily assume the duties of the company's executive director, Kira requested of Dmitri, extending her hand to him. I'm sure Mark would approve of this choice. And I'm just not in a position to manage the business right now, especially since Mark didn't brief me on many details. Dmitri let out a heavy sigh and looked Kira directly in the eyes. All right, my dear, but only until we find out what happened to your husband, he said thoughtfully. Then he suggested, let's organize a big press conference for investors and journalists, prepare them for some changes in the company's leadership. It will make it easier for us to keep everything under control, and they won't have the opportunity to claim that we're hiding something from them. Kira felt a slight sense of relief. Dmitri was a person she could rely on, and she knew that under his leadership, the company would stay afloat until they found Mark or unraveled the mystery of his disappearance. Action was necessary, and Kira was ready to fight for her business and her family, despite all the challenges that seemed insurmountable to her. Brilliant idea, Kira exclaimed, her face lighting up with determination once more. I just can't imagine what I would be doing right now. Nothing. She felt the encroaching darkness recede, and now she knew that with Dmitri they would handle the current situation. Dmitri patted her on the shoulder like a caring father. Kirochka, it's okay. Calm down. I'm deeply concerned about Mark too, but we must be strong, primarily for his sake. His words were both comforting and a reminder that they were in the same boat now and needed to keep it afloat together. In the end, Dmitri's plan worked. Kira and Dmitri held a major press conference where they informed the public and journalists that the CEO of the holding company was on a creative sabbatical. How long does he plan to be absent? One of the journalists asked, attempting to dig for more information. Exactly as long as he needs to fully recover and come up with new ideas for the company's future, Kira replied with a composed face. She spoke the words with conviction, believing that Mark's sabbatical was not only well-deserved but also necessary. Mark has always been known for his innovative views and literally generating ideas. However, in every person's life, there comes a moment when they feel they can no longer provide people and the world with what they used to excel in. The audience and journalists listened to Kira with interest, and her response appeared logical and respectful toward the CEO. For the sake of my husband and me, Mark insists on keeping the time of his return to business confidential, Kira continued. After all, please show respect to the man who hasn't taken a vacation in 10 years. Her words were an invitation to be tolerant and respectful of Mark's personal life, as he had always been dedicated to his work and the company. After Kira concluded her press conference, she hurried to the police station, as if her life depended on it. There, in the investigation room, she was met by a detective named Ivan, who, with a stern look, began to carefully listen to her request not to disclose the search for her missing husband. Oh my God, Kira, you're asking for something absurd. The investigator exclaimed with disapproval, waving his hand. How can you come with such demands? This is like a circus. You're offending the heavens by asking for this. You could have hired a private detective, but instead, you come to the police with such requests, Ivan. I can't believe it. Kira, realizing that offering money was a mistake, lowered her gaze, feeling herself in an awkward situation. However, her determination to keep her husband's disappearance a secret from society was so strong that she was willing to go to any lengths. Expression, please, you must help me with this. I'm willing to pay you. Just help me. The police officer was taken aback by the request, then cautiously replied, You are in terrible shape, Kira, but perhaps I can do something. Understand, though, it will only be a temporary solution, nothing more. Later, you will decide what to do. As time passed, Mark never reappeared, and eventually, Dmitri had to admit that the CEO of the holding had disappeared. Otherwise, the investigation refused to continue the search, and the mystery of his disappearance remained unsolved. Events unfolded into a full-blown storm, and the scandal that erupted in the press proved to be nothing but an inevitable disaster for Kira and her deputy. It was like déjà vu haunting them once again. The public demanded answers, and thousands of questions swirled in Kira's mind, remaining unanswered. What had happened to Mark? Where did he disappear to? And the most horrifying question that tormented her soul, was he even alive? The police were not idle and made every possible effort to unravel the mystery of Mark's disappearance, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. At the same time, Kira continued to manage her own store but periodically visited her husband's company's office to ensure that things were going as smoothly as possible. Dmitri, Mark's deputy, diligently tried to preserve all the innovations and improvements Mark had introduced, while only overseeing the most essential processes. It was a tremendous responsibility they carried on their shoulders. 6 months had passed unnoticed, but for Kira it had been an endless sea of sorrow and despair. Her search for her husband had hit a dead end, and the investigation, as if losing its way, wandered through a labyrinth. She felt like a straw widow, facing an impossible choice: to end this fruitless struggle and bury Mark or continue her futile search. One evening, as Kira sat in her room, she was browsing an internet catalog of Canadian lumber provided by a manufacturer, intending to order this wood for her workshop. Lately, she had been thinking more and more about expanding her product range and adding wooden furniture to her collection: coffee tables, dressing tables, dressers, and so on. Kira saw this as a new stage in the development of her business and, therefore, decided to contract for the supply of a small volume of wood, bypassing intermediaries. As she scrolled through photos of forests and a lumber mill on the catalog, Kira suddenly noticed something unusual in one of the pictures. Something caught her attention, but she couldn't yet determine what it was. The image featured a small group of lumberjacks, 5 of them smiling, holding bundles of wood and axes in their hands. The caption beneath the photo read, "In these forests, we harvest wood for you with love." Studying the picture carefully, she felt her blood freeze in her veins, as if she were on the verge of an incredible new chapter in her life. In the photograph, among the confident lumberjacks, she discovered Mark, but he had undergone radical changes. A thick, curly beard covered his face, and his hands were strengthened by powerful, sun-kissed muscles. Kira realized with astonishment that before her stood the real Mark, but entirely different from the one she had known. His green eyes turned toward her, and they reflected something entirely foreign. He appeared like a stranger. Of course, after almost a year of living in the woods, in the midst of pine trees under the scorching sun, anyone could change, especially if they didn't pay attention to self-care. Kira remembered her futile attempts to involve him in her fitness activities. Closing the laptop with a loud snap, she overwhelmed herself with bitter thoughts. Was this really true? Had Mark just left everything and walked away, with no explanations, no plans for the future? How would she manage his business when she knew almost nothing about the industry? The new chapter in her life enveloped her with excitement and fear, like a misty forest that needed to be explored. Tears streamed uncontrollably down the woman's cheeks, and she no longer tried to hide her emotions. Everything she had held back throughout this long year, anger, sadness, and resentment, now poured out. Her emotions were like a volcano erupting within her. Kira felt that it was getting easier for her. Now she knew that her husband was alive and, judging from the photo, doing well. But that didn't mean she was going to forgive him for such audacious and treacherous betrayal. Opening her laptop again, she copied the address of the company that supplied the wood with trembling hands. That same evening, laying out plans for her new future, Kira resolutely booked plane tickets to Canada. She decided to go there and see her husband with her own eyes, to make sure he had made this decision while in his right mind. "Let's see what you have to say, you traitor, when you see me," she whispered with hatred, closing the tab with the scoundrel's photo for good. The next morning, the woman faced a long and agonizing journey. After spending almost a day on the plane, Kira finally landed at her destination. Stopping in the town where the lumber mill from the photo was located, she decided not to use Mark's real name, introducing herself as a distant relative wanting to visit her third cousin. Approaching the security guard, she showed a picture of Mark and gained access to the area where the trees were being cut. For safety reasons, she had to wear a helmet. After walking deep into the forest for several dozen meters, Kira found him. Tall and robust, Mark looked just as she remembered him before his disappearance. Only the grown-out hair and beard, along with the ruggedness of his body, indicated how much had changed in his life since that fateful day. Mark was working on cutting down one of the tall trees and didn't notice Kira approaching him. So much has changed, Kira thought as she watched him with a challenging gaze. He, the scoundrel, appeared perplexed as if he didn't recognize her or understand what was happening. "Miss, is there something you need from me?" he asked in English. "How did you get here?" Mark asked, turning around. Kira felt a rush of triumph as she heard the beautiful voice behind her. Her sorrow was suddenly replaced by a triumphant confusion when she met Mark's gaze. Ethan, as he now called himself, looked startled first at Kira, then at the stranger. "Ethan, who is this? Why is this woman looking at you like that?" Kira's insides twisted with pain. "So that's it. Now you go by Ethan," she started to confront her husband. How could you? I've been searching for you, suffering so much, and you have another woman here. Kira began to punch her unfaithful husband in the chest, and he could only weakly defend himself while continuing to be confused. What? I don't understand your language. Is this Russian? Are you Russian? He asked in Russian, trying to comprehend what was happening. Hey, get away from my husband. The stranger lunged at Kira. It was only then that Kira noticed the beautiful dark-eyed girl in front of her, who looked like the sunny sky after a storm. The bright light gave her a stunning resemblance to a stormy sky. He's my husband too, Kira shouted in English and saw the other girl freeze, her face expressing a not entirely friendly question. What are you? Kira began, addressing the stranger, but she suddenly turned to Mark. Ethan, what's going on here? Who is she? Rachel, the lovely woman, asked, expressing her confusion. I don't understand either, Mark replied with genuine bewilderment. I'm seeing this woman for the first time. She said we're Nevitsy or something. What does that mean, Kira? Kira, tired of all this spectacle, pulled another photo of Mark from under her clothes, the one where they were together at their wedding. Here, she handed him the picture. Rachel, now I hope everything becomes clear. Rachel took the photo in her hands, looked at it with undeniable amazement, and then handed it to Mark. He looked at the picture with the same question in his eyes, and then at Kira herself. This is impossible, Mark said. I've been married to Rachel for 10 years, we met in college, we have 3 kids. Kira felt her lips trembling with excitement. No, it can't be. You are my husband, Mark. Rachel turned the photo and looked at the date. After that, she exhaled in relief, smiled, and took her wallet from her purse. In it was a small wedding photo, showing her as a very young woman, and next to her was Mark, smiling with happiness. Judging by their faces in the photo, they were newlyweds about 20 or maybe 22 years old. To be continued in the next video.